The Vesshaar Concord Fleet crossed the last dark gulf between the stars with the unhurried patience of a machine that had never once been wrong. 211 warships, arrayed in the wide diamond formation their doctrine called the certainty, slid out of the fold current, and into the outer edge of the small yellow system, their charts labeled as Target 9 Umber. On every bridge, on every gunnery deck, on every sensor cradle across those 211 hulls, the same reading glowed in the same steady amber. Threat assessment negligible, projected engagement duration 4 hours, projected fleet losses 0. The Vesshaar did not begin a campaign until the prediction reached 0. That was not arrogance, they would have told anyone who asked. Arrogance was for lesser species who guessed. The Vesshaar computed. They fed the numbers of a world into the great tally engines that filled the lower decks of their command ships, and they did not commit their fleet until those engines returned a certainty above 99.9%. In 1100 years of conquest across a quarter of the galactic arm, the tally engines had been wrong exactly twice, and both times the error had been corrected within a single rotation. The conquered did not lose. It could not afford to understand what losing meant. Warden Ascendant Oru Thesk stood at the center of the command ship Unbroken Ledger and watched the third planet resolve on the great forward lens. He was old for a Vesshaar of his rank, his chitin on the deep gray of a hull left too long in vacuum, the twin sensory stalks above his brow worn smooth from decades of use. He had overseen the pacification of 9 worlds. He had never lost a ship. When the tally engine had returned this world's number, 99.97, he had felt something close to boredom, and boredom was the closest thing to peace his kind ever knew. "Report the target," he said, and his voice membrane carried the words in the flat rhythm of a species that had long ago pruned emotion out of its speech as an inefficiency. The reading officer at the forward cradle did not look up. Third planet, single species dominant, designation by their own transmissions, humans. Population estimated 11 billion planetside, 40 million in orbital and outsystem installations. Industrial base, pre-fold. They have crossed to their own moon and the 4th planet. They possess sublight vessels only. No fold capability detected. No coherent planetary defense grid. No fleet. No fleet, Thesk repeated. It was the phrase that mattered. A world without a fleet was a world already conquered. The only remaining question was how gently the conquering would go. The Vesshaar preferred gentle. A shattered world produced nothing. An intact world, its will broken cleanly and its industry left standing, paid tribute for 1,000 years. Their weapons. Chemical and kinetic. Some fusion-scale ordnance in planetary silos, insufficient range to reach us. One deep system installation of interest. The officer flicked a claw, and a marker bloomed on the lens far out past the 4th planet in the cold belt of ice and rubble at the system's edge. A construction facility. Large. They are building something. Thesk considered the marker. It sat alone in the dark, well beyond the human homeworld, a bright point of industry a long way from anything else. Magnify. The lens leapt inward, and the installation filled the forward wall of the bridge. It was a foundry. There was no mistaking the shape of it, not to a species that had built 10,000 foundries of its own. A great ring, perhaps 40 kilometers across, turned slowly against the black, and at its heart hung a smaller sphere wrapped in a lattice of collector veins like the petals of a metal flower half closed. The ring bristled with construction cradles, and in several of them the skeletons of ships lay half-formed, long-keeled and clean-lined, the first real war hulls the humans had ever attempted. They were crude. Their drives were sublight. But they were being built, and a species that could build warships could, given a century or two, build a fleet, and a fleet was a variable the tally engines did not like. "They call it StarForge," the reading officer said, parsing the intercepted human traffic. "Their outermost installation, their most advanced." It draws power from a captured deuterium source and forges hull metal at densities their surface industry cannot achieve. It is, by their own transmissions, the pride of their species, the seed of everything they intend to become. Then we will take the seed before it flowers, Thesk said. A world without a foundry is a world without a future. Break the foundry and the homeworld surrenders itself. Fleet order, the diamond splits. 2 arms to the homeworld to establish presence and demand capitulation. 1 arm to the outer installation to seize or, if seizure proves impractical, to end it. I will take the outer arm myself. There was a pause on the bridge. It was, by Vesshaar standards, nearly a gasp. A warden ascendant did not personally lead the lesser prong of a split. But Thesk had looked at the foundry, at the half-built ships in their cradles, and something in the long-worn instinct beneath his computations had turned toward it. Not fear. He did not have the concept, but attention. The seed of a species was the one place worth standing when it was crushed, so that the crushing could be remembered correctly. By your certainty, the officer said, which was how the Vesshaar said yes. 60 ships peeled away from the diamond and turned their prows toward the cold edge of the system, and the great engines of the unbroken ledger woke, and the arm of the fleet began its long fall toward the place the humans called StarForge. Kael Ardan felt the fleet before any alarm sounded, though he could never afterward explain how, and no one ever quite believed him. He was 300 meters down the primary heat shaft of the forge core, wedged in a maintenance cradle with his arms buried to the shoulder in the guts of a coolant manifold, when the whole station changed its note. That was the only way he had of describing it. The StarForge was never silent. It hummed always, a vast subsonic chord made of the turning ring and the pulsing core, and the 10,000 pumps and vanes and field coils that kept a captured starfire leashed at the station's heart. Most people never heard it. They stopped hearing it in their first week, the way a person stops hearing their own blood. Kael had never stopped hearing it. He had grown up on the StarForge, born in its medical ring 20 years before, and the chord of the place was the first sound he had ever known and the sound he heard under every other sound, and when it changed, he felt it in his teeth. It went sharp, just slightly, a tightening high up in the harmonic, the sound a wire makes a half-second before it takes a load it was not built for. Kael pulled his arms free of the manifold and hung there in the low gravity of the shaft, listening. Around him the coolant lines ticked and breathed. Far above, through 300 meters of shielding, the core turned over its slow fire, and under all of it that new sharpness, that leaning forward tension, as if the whole station had heard something in the dark and gone still to listen. "Forge Master," he said into his collar mic. "This is Ardan down in Heat Shaft Primary. Are we spinning up?" The core note just shifted. A pause, then the voice of Ilse Varen, Forge Master of the Day Watch, tired and unbothered. "Nothing spinning up, Ardan. Loads flat. You're hearing pump cycle." "It's not pump cycle." Kael closed his eyes. He knew the pump cycle the way he knew his own heartbeat. This was not that. Something changed the load, not from inside, from outside. Something's pulling on the field. "Nothing pulls on the field from outside, Ardan. There's nothing out here but us and 40 kilometers of ice." A sigh came down the line, the particular sigh reserved for him, the one that meant the strange, quiet boy is hearing things again. Kael had heard that sigh his whole life. He had heard it from instructors who could not understand why a young man who could feel a hairline field fluctuation from 300 meters away kept failing his certification exams. He had heard it from the other apprentices, who called him tap behind his back and sometimes to his face, because he was forever pressing his palm flat to a bulkhead and telling them something was wrong with a system that every gauge insisted was fine, and being right often enough to be unsettling and wrong often enough to be dismissed. He had heard it from his own father, before the accident on the number 4 cradle had made the sighing stop for good. Kael did not argue. He had learned over 20 years that arguing with people who trusted gauges more than they trusted him was a way of spending breath he would rather keep. Instead, he uncoupled his cradle and started up the shaft, hand over hand along the guide rail, toward the observation gallery 2 levels up where the shaft opened onto a real window and a person could see the dark. He was halfway there when the alarms began. They did not begin gently. Every klaxon on the StarForge sounded at once, the deep 3-note pulse that meant proximity contact, hostile, and under it the station-wide channel opened and Ilse Varen's voice came through. No longer tired, no longer bored, the certainty scoured out of it. All hands, this is not a drill. Deep system contact, multiple hulls closing at combat velocity. They are not answering hail. Fleet Command flags them hostile. This is a hostile contact. All hands to evacuation stations. All hands. And then the words dissolved into the practiced litany of an evacuation Kael had drilled 100 times and never once believed would come. He reached the gallery, he pulled himself to the window, and he saw them. They came out of the black the way a bruise comes up under skin, first as absences, stars going out in ordered rows where hulls slid between the StarForge and the deeper dark. And then, as they closed and the station's running lights caught them, as shapes. Long-bladed, patient shapes, 60 of them, arrayed in a formation so precise it looked less like a fleet than like a single geometric thought. They did not rush. That was the thing Kael would remember, standing at the window with his heart going like a trip hammer and his hands cold on the rail. They did not rush. They came on at a steady, measured, unhurried pace, the pace of something that had done this many times before, and had learned that there was no need to hurry, because the ending was already written, and only the middle remained to be walked through. 60 warships. And the StarForge had 11 light defense platforms, none of them meant for anything heavier than a rogue ice fragment, and a garrison of 200 and 4,000 workers, and Kael Ardan hanging at a window with his palm pressed flat to the cold glass, feeling through it the enormous, gathering pressure of engines that could unmake his whole world. The evacuation was fast and it was orderly and it was, Kael understood within the first 10 minutes, not going to save the StarForge. He moved with the crowds because there was nothing else to do, funneled down the spoke corridors toward the evac ring where the lifeboats waited, 400 of them, enough for everyone if everyone was quick. And everyone was quick, because humans who worked 40 kilometers from anything learned early to be quick, and because the Forge Master's voice on the all-channel stayed level and gave clean instructions and did not once let the fear that was surely in her show through into the words. Families from the residential ring, cradle crews still in their work shells, medics guiding the days injured, children. The StarForge held 4,000 souls, and it emptied them into the dark in tidy pressurized handfuls while the 60 ships came on. Kael did not get into a lifeboat. He told himself later that he did not know why, but that was not quite true. He knew. He stood at the mouth of the evac ring in the press of the crowd, one more young man in a workshell being carried toward safety, and he felt the station's cord under everything, that sharp leaning note, and he understood something that the gauges had not yet told the Forge Master, something that had come to him through his palm on the glass and his whole life of hearing what others could not. The core was not going to shut down cleanly. It could not. The StarForge held a leashed fusion fire at densities the human surface could not dream of, and that fire was kept from becoming a bomb only by the constant, delicate, active work of the containment field, a field powered by the very core it contained, a snake with its tail in its mouth. To evacuate meant to abandon the field crews. To abandon the field crews meant the field would begin its slow, automatic safing sequence, drawing the fire down over 11 hours, and the 60 ships would arrive in less than one. When their weapons touched the StarForge, they would not just kill 4,000 people who were, by then, mostly gone. They would rupture a containment field around a captured star, and the fire would get loose, and it would not merely destroy the foundry. It would flash across half the outer system in a single unshaped instant, a wasted sun, taking with it every lifeboat that had not yet cleared the blast horizon. And at the pace the evacuation was moving, that would be most of them. Kael turned around. He did it quietly. No one noticed one young man in a workshell peeling out of the crowd and moving the wrong way upstream, back toward the core, back toward the great turning heart of the StarForge where the fire lived. He moved fast because he knew the maintenance ways better than anyone alive, better than the Forge Master, better than the engineers with their certifications he had never earned. He had spent his whole strange, dismissed life crawling through the veins of this place, listening to it. He knew where he was going. He was going to the Forge. The Forge control spire rose at the very hub of the StarForge, a slender stalk of a room suspended in the exact center of the turning ring, wrapped on all sides by armored glass, so that whoever sat the Forge Master's chair could see the core directly, could look with their own eyes on the leashed fire they tended. It was the most protected place on the station and the most exposed, and when Kael pulled himself up through the access hatch in its floor, it was empty. Empty but not dark. The core hung beyond the glass, close enough to fill the sky, a sphere of collapsed deuterium the size of a stadium, sheathed in the shifting auroral light of the containment field. It turned. It always turned, slow and vast, and the light of it painted the empty control spire in shades of gold and violet and a deep furnace red, and the cord of the station poured through the deck and up through Kael's boots and into his chest. And here, this close, it was not a hum. It was a roar held behind glass, a scream compressed into a single sustained note, and under it, sharp and rising, that leaning tension he had felt 300 meters down. The Forge was already beginning to safe itself. He could see it in the field light, a slow reddening, a thickening of the aurora as the automatic sequence started to draw the fire down, exactly as he had known it would, and exactly as slowly. 11 hours to safe, less than one until the ships. Kael crossed to the Forge Master's chair and sat down in it, a 20-year-old apprentice who had failed every certification the station offered, in the seat that only the most senior engineers on the StarForge were permitted to touch, and he put his hands on the control yokes, and he closed his eyes, and he listened. He had sat this chair before, not officially, never officially, but the StarForge ran a night watch that was thin and tired, and there had been long shifts in his 18th and 19th years when Ilse Varen, who was not unkind, and who had noticed things about him that the certification exams did not measure, had let him sit the second chair through the small hours and feel the Forge run. She had never let him touch the yokes with the field live. No one would. But she had let him sit and listen, and once, quietly, near the end of a long dead-of-night watch, she had said to him, "You hear it, don't you? The way it wants to go. I've run this Forge for 30 years and I read it off the gauges. You hear it." And then she had said nothing else, and neither had he, because there was nothing to say that would not have gotten them both disciplined. He heard it now. He heard the whole of it, the great slow turn of the fire. The field wrapped around it like a hand around a coal, straining, straining. The safing sequence pulling everything down toward a cold that would take 11 hours to reach and that the ships would not permit. And under all of it, he heard the thing that no gauge on the StarForge was built to show, the thing that had come to him through his palm and his teeth and his whole life of being wrong until he was right. The Forge did not want to go cold. That was not mysticism. Kael was not a mystic. He was a boy who had spent 20 years learning a machine so completely that he had stopped being able to tell where the machine's logic ended and his own began. The Forge was a fusion system running at the ragged edge of what physics allowed, held there by an active field, and a system like that had states. It had a low state, cold and safe, and 11 hours away. It had its normal running state, the state it lived in, forging hull metal for the ships in the cradles. And it had a high state, a state the manuals mentioned only to forbid, a state past the running state, up where the fire fed the field and the field fed the fire, and the whole snake eating its tail circle spun faster and tighter and hotter, and the Forge stopped merely holding a star and started, in a small and terrible and beautiful way, becoming one. No one had ever taken the StarForge to the high state. It was suicide. It required holding a runaway fusion reaction in perfect dynamic balance by continuous active control, adjustment on adjustment on adjustment, faster than any human could calculate forever, with no margin, because the margin was the difference between a leashed sun and a loose one. The station's automatic systems could not do it. They were built for stability, not for dancing on a knife. And no human could do it, because no human could read the field fast enough, could feel each fluctuation before it grew, could stay ahead of a star. No human but one, maybe, who had never learned to trust a gauge, because he had never needed one. Kael opened his eyes. Beyond the glass the core turned, reddening. On the console before him, a proximity display showed 60 bladed shapes closing, 40 minutes out now, in a formation so precise it looked drawn with a ruler. And on the all-channel, faint, still level, Ilse Varen's voice counted lifeboats away from the StarForge. 140 clear, 160 clear. Far too slow, hundreds still in the ring. And behind them a captured star beginning either to die over 11 hours or, if he did nothing else, to be shot loose in one. He keyed the all-channel. His voice, when it came, surprised him by not shaking. "Forge Master Varen, this is Ardan. I'm in the control spire. I've got the forge." The pause on the line was long enough that he thought she had not heard. Then, "Ardan," very quiet, very careful. "You get out of that chair and you get to a lifeboat. That is an order." "The safing sequence won't finish before they get here," Kael said. "You know it won't. When their weapons hit the field, the core goes loose. Every boat inside the blast horizon burns. That's most of them, Forge Master. That's most of everyone left." He watched the ships close. "I'm going to hold the field. I'm going to take it up, not down. Up past running into the high state, and I'm going to hold it there live so that when they shoot us the fire doesn't get loose. It stays leashed in my hands right up until the end. It buys the boats their blast horizon. Every minute I hold, more of them clear. No one can hold the high state, Ardan." But her voice had changed. She was not telling him he was wrong. She was telling him she was afraid he was right. No human can read the field fast enough to. "I know," Kael said. "I know no one can." He put his hands back on the yokes. Beyond the glass the fire turned and the cord of it poured into him, and for the first time in his whole strange, dismissed life he did not feel wrong. He felt like the one right instrument finally set to the one thing it had been built, without anyone meaning to build it, to do. "But I've been hearing it since before I could talk. Get them to the boats, Forge Master. Get everyone you can into the dark. And when you're clear, tell them a tap did it." He cut the channel before she could answer, because he did not want to hear her order him out again, and he did not want to hear her cry, and he especially did not want to hear the small broken sound she made instead, which was neither. Then Kael Ardan, 20 years old, uncertified, unbelieved, took hold of a captured star and began to lift it. At 40,000 kilometers, Warden Ascendant Oru Thesk gave the order to slow the arm. He did not need to. Doctrine did not require it. The foundry had no meaningful defenses, its light platforms already flagged and mapped, and the standing plan called for a steady approach to optimal range and a clean disabling strike on the containment ring, after which the fire at the foundry's heart could be safely vented and the wreck secured or destroyed at leisure. There was no tactical reason to slow. But Thesk had watched the foundry for the last half hour on the great forward lens, and something in it had begun to bother the old instinct beneath his numbers, and he had learned across 9 conquests to attend to that instinct, even when the tally engine could not see what it saw. The foundry's heart was getting brighter. "Reading officer," he said. "The installation's core, report its state." The officer's claws moved across the cradle. There was a pause, a small one, but Thesk noted it because his reading officers did not usually pause. "Warden Ascendant, the core is increasing output, not decreasing." Another pause. "This is anomalous. Standard procedure for a threatened fusion installation is to reduce and safe the reaction. Ours do." Every installation we have ever engaged has done so. This one is doing the opposite. Output is rising. A malfunction, said the tactical officer from the adjacent cradle. Their containment is failing under the stress of evacuation. The core is running away. It will destroy itself and save us the ordnance. It was a reasonable reading. It fit the numbers. Thesk almost accepted it, and if he had, the whole of what followed would still have happened, only he would have understood it later and worse. But he did not accept it because he was watching the lens, and a runaway core did not look like what he was watching. A runaway core was chaos. It was a reaction tearing loose from its leash, output spiking in ragged jumps, the containment field flaring and buckling, and dying in the ugly stutter of a system coming apart. Thesk had seen it many times. It looked like a thing breaking. The foundry's core did not look like a thing breaking. Its output was not spiking in ragged jumps. It was climbing smoothly, continuously, in a long, clean curve, and its containment field was not flaring and dying. Its containment field was tightening. As the fire rose, the leash rose with it, matched to it, holding it, and the whole system was climbing together up a curve so smooth and so controlled that it simply could not be a malfunction, because malfunctions were not graceful, and this was the most graceful thing Thesk had ever seen a fusion system do. Someone was doing that. Correction, the reading officer said, and now there was something in the flat Vesshaar voice that Thesk had not heard in it in a very long time, a roughening, the sound of a certainty coming loose at one edge. The core is not running away. The output curve is under active control. Containment is tracking output within tolerances. The officer stopped. Within tolerances that should not be achievable. The field is being adjusted continuously, thousands of times per second, faster than that. The adjustments are preemptive. The field is moving before the fluctuations it counters. Warden Ascendant, something aboard that installation is anticipating a fusion field. It is staying ahead of a star. The bridge of the unbroken ledger had gone very quiet. That is not possible, the tactical officer said. It was not an argument. It was a plea, the reflexive protest of a mind whose entire architecture rested on the word possible. No processing system we have ever encountered can predict a live fusion field. Our own tally engines cannot do it. We do not attempt the high-state balance because it cannot be held. It is a theoretical, it is forbidden, it cannot be. And yet, said Warden Ascendant Oru Thesk, watching the small, distant heart of the human foundry climb, smooth and golden and impossibly controlled, toward a brightness that a moment ago his charts had called impossible. It is being held. He stared at the lens, and for the first time in 1100 years of his species' unbroken record, the old warden felt the tally engine's number, 99.97, projected losses 0, stir under him like ice beginning to give. Slow the arm, he said again, and this time everyone understood why. Full sensor focus on the foundry core. I want to know what is holding that field. I want to know what it is. He paused. And I want to know how many of them there are. Inside the control spire, Kael Ardan was not thinking in words. He had stopped thinking in words about 90 seconds after he took hold of the yokes, and he would not think in words again until it was over. Words were too slow. Words were a thing you built after the fact to explain a moment that had already gone. What he was doing now happened in the space before words, in the place where his palm on a bulkhead had always known a system was failing before the gauges caught up. And there was no room in it for language, no room for fear, no room for anything but the fire and the field and the endless work of keeping them married. It went like this. The fire wanted to bulge. Always somewhere, always in some direction. The collapsed deuterium at the core's heart wanted to push out, to find the seam in its cage and swell into it. And if it swelled unopposed for even a fraction of a second, it would grow, and the growing would feed on itself, and the leash would break. So Kael felt the bulge before it happened, felt the pressure gather, the way you feel a sneeze gather, the way you feel a wave draw back before it breaks. And he moved the field to meet it, thickened the leash exactly there, exactly then, no sooner and no later, and the bulge pressed into a wall that was already waiting for it and subsided, and somewhere else another bulge was already gathering, and he was already moving to meet that one too. There was no rest in it. There was no moment where the star was balanced and he could breathe. The balance was not a place. It was a motion, a continuous falling forward, 10,000 corrections a second, each one thrown ahead of the fluctuation it would catch, and the instant he stopped throwing them the whole thing would come apart. He was not holding the star. He was dancing with it, and the dance had no end and no music but the roar behind the glass. And Kael, who had failed every test the StarForge had ever set him because he could not show his working, danced. And as he danced, he lifted. He could have simply held the running state, kept the forge where it lived, stable enough, buying the lifeboats their minutes. But holding the running state under fire would not be enough. The instant the Vesshaar weapons touched the field, even a running state field, the shock would be more than the leash could track, and the fire would get loose anyway, and all his dancing would buy nothing. He had understood this the moment he sat down. To keep the fire leashed when the shooting started, he needed the field harder than the running state could make it, harder than the forge had ever been asked to be. He needed the high state. He needed to take the captured sun up past the place the manuals forbade, up to where the fire fed the field, and the field fed the fire in a circle so tight, and so hot that the leash became stronger than any weapon they could bring, because it was drawing its strength from the very thing it was leashing. So he lifted smooth. He did not lunge for the high state. A lunge would have torn the field. He walked the fire up the curve one correction at a time, each correction a fraction harder than the last, the roar behind the glass climbing with it from a scream into something that had no name, the field light shifting from gold through white toward a blue-white edge that no one aboard the StarForge had ever seen, because no one aboard the StarForge had ever lived to see the forge burn this bright. Far away, at the edge of his attention, Kael was aware of things. He was aware that the lifeboats were still leaving. He could feel the small shutters in the ring as each one launched, and he counted them without counting them, and each one made the work worth another minute. He was aware that the 60 ships had slowed. He could feel that too, the pressure of their engines easing, though he could not have said how he knew. He was aware, distantly, that he was probably going to die here in this chair, when the field finally took a hit it could not track, or when his own body finally failed at a task no body was built to sustain. He was aware of all of it, and none of it reached the place where the dance was, and the dance went on. The forge climbed, and on 60 Vesshaar warships, 60 sensor grids screamed. Warden Ascendant. The reading officer's voice had lost the last of its flatness. Every sensor in the arm is registering the same event. Simultaneous. I have confirmation across all 60 hulls. The foundry core has crossed a threshold our instruments are not calibrated to expect. It is. The officer stopped. Thesk had never, in 40 years of service, seen a reading officer stop mid-report. Say it, Thesk said. It is a star, Warden Ascendant. The words came out of the officer as if dragged. The output signature, the mass energy curve, the neutrino flux. Our instruments are cross-referencing the foundry core against the stellar catalog because they cannot find any other match in their libraries. The nearest thing in our records to what that installation's heart is now doing is the ignition sequence of a stellar body. The humans have not lost control of a fusion reactor. They have started to light a sun. On purpose, by hand. And they are holding it. For a long moment, no one on the bridge of the unbroken ledger spoke. Thesk stood at the center of it and looked at the lens, where the human foundry hung against the dark with its heart gone blue-white and blinding. Brighter now than the distant yellow star, this whole system turned around. A second sun kindled at the cold edge of nowhere by a species his charts had called pre-fold. He had led 9 conquests. He had broken 9 worlds that were, on paper, far stronger than this one. Not one of them had ever done anything his tally engine had not already accounted for. The number was the point. The number was the whole of Vesshaar power, to know, before committing a single ship, exactly how the thing would go and to be right. 99.97. Projected losses, 0. The number was, he understood now, watching the second sun burn where his charts had promised him a helpless foundry, worthless. Not wrong by a margin, worthless. Because the tally engine had weighed this world and found no fleet, and it had been correct. There was no fleet, and it had found no fold drive, and it had been correct. And it had found sublight weapons and a broken defense grid and 11 billion primitives on a single blue world. All correct, every number correct. And the sum of all those correct numbers had told him this would be easy. And the sum was a lie, because somewhere in that foundry there was a variable the tally engine had no column for. And that variable had just lit a star. How many? Thesk said. The reading officer turned. Warden Ascendant. The thing that is holding that field. Our analysis said it must be a distributed processing system, a great engine, a vast intelligence, because nothing else could stay ahead of a live star. Locate it. I want to know how large it is. I want to know how much of that installation is given over to the mind that is doing this, so that I know how much of this species' strength is bound up in the one place we came to break. He needed to know. If the humans had built some singular machine mind to do the impossible, some irreplaceable engine of their whole civilization, then breaking the foundry still broke them, and the number, wounded, might yet be salvaged. Find me the intelligence. Find me its size. The bridge worked. 60 ships turned the full weight of their sensors on the human foundry, peeling through the containment glare, mapping the control systems, tracing the 10,000 adjustment signals back along their paths to their source, hunting for the vast mind that had to be there, the only thing that could be there, the great cold engine that was staying ahead of a star. And they found the source. And the reading officer looked at what the sensors returned and looked again, and ran the confirmation across all 60 hulls because he did not believe it, and got the same answer 60 times, and turned to his warden ascendant with the last of 1,100 years of certainty draining out of his voice. There is no intelligence, warden ascendant, he said. There is no engine. The adjustment signals do not originate from a distributed processing array. They do not originate from any computational system at all. We have traced every one of the 10,000 corrections per second back to their source, and the source is a single control station at the heart of the installation, and in that station there is one seat, and in that seat there is. There is what? Thesk said, though some old cold part of him beneath the numbers had already begun to know. There is one of them, the reading officer said. One human, a single organism, small, young by their own biometric standards, barely adult. It is alone in the control station. Its life signs are elevated but stable. It is not connected to any machine intelligence. It is not augmented. It is not, so far as our instruments can determine, anything but an ordinary member of its species. The officer's stalks had drawn back flat against his skull, the Vesshaar posture of an animal that has seen a predator it has no defense against. One of them, warden ascendant, not a fleet, not an engine, not a civilization's masterwork. One young human, sitting in a chair, is holding a star in balance by hand, and by doing so is doing the thing our entire species has spent 1,100 years declaring impossible. And it is only one. There are 11 billion more on the world behind us. The silence on the bridge of the unbroken ledger was total. Kael did not know that 60 warships had just found him. He knew only the dance, and the dance had reached a place he had never imagined, up in the high state where the forge burned blue-white, and the roar behind the glass had become a pressure he felt in his bones, in his blood, in the roots of his teeth. He was past the manuals now. He was past anything anyone had ever written down. He was in the country beyond the maps, alone, with a sun in his hands, and the strangest thing, the thing he would never be able to explain to anyone, though only one being in all that dark would ever come close to understanding, was that it was working. He was holding it. 10,000 corrections a second, and he was making every one, throwing each one ahead of its fluctuation, staying in front of the fire, and the field was harder now than any weapon the 60 ships carried could hope to break, and every lifeboat that fled the StarForge fled into a dark that would stay dark, because the sun at the station's heart was not going to get loose. He had done it. He had done the impossible thing, the thing no gauge could measure and no exam could test and no certification could grant. And he had done it because he was the one instrument in all of human space tuned to exactly this, and no one had ever known, and now it did not matter that no one had ever known, because it was true. And then, at the ragged edge of his star-filled attention, Kael felt the 60 ships stop. Not slow. Stop. He felt the great pressure of their engines ease all the way down to holding, 60 enormous presences going still in the dark all around the StarForge, and he understood in the wordless place where he lived now what it meant. They had seen him. They had come to break a helpless foundry, and they had slowed when the fire began to climb, and now they had stopped entirely, 60 warships of a species that did not stop, and they were looking at him. At the one small human in the one small chair holding the one impossible star, and they were afraid. Kael Ardan, 20 years old, uncertified, alone at the heart of a burning forge, felt the fear of 60 warships wash over him like heat off the glass, and he did not gloat because he had no room left for gloating, and he did not exult because he had no room left for that either. But somewhere far under the dance, in the small human part of him that the fire had not swallowed, he thought, very simply and very clearly, one thought in words. Good, now you understand. Now you know what you came here to break. And he held the star, and he waited to see what they would do. On the bridge of the escort cruiser just measure, holding station off the unbroken ledger's flank, Subwarden Eric Vall watched the human foundry burn and reached, as a good Vesshaar officer was trained to reach, for the doctrine. The doctrine was clear. Eric Vall loved the doctrine the way the young love a thing that has never yet failed them. He was 3 conquests into his service, unblooded by defeat, and he believed in the tally engines with the whole clean force of a mind that had never seen one wrong. And the doctrine, on the matter of an enemy capability you did not understand, was not ambiguous. It did not counsel patience. It did not counsel wonder. It said, destroy it before it is finished becoming what it is. Eric Vall opened a channel to the flag. Warden Ascendant. He kept his voice in the flat register, but under it, if a listener knew how to hear, was the particular urgency of the young who fear their elders have grown slow. The core continues to climb. Every rotation we hold, it passes further beyond our strike envelope. If we are to end this thing, the window is closing. I request permission to fire on the control station with a focused kinetic lance. A single strike. We sever the organism from the field before the field grows past our reach. The fire falls loose while it is still small enough that the blast dies before it touches the arm. It is the doctrinal solution. It is the certain solution. I ask only that you let me take it. There was a silence on the flag channel, and in it, Eric Vall heard the whole of his fear. That the old warden, who had left the diamond to lead this arm himself, had been captured by the very thing they had come to break, had looked too long at the burning foundry and lost the cold that made a Vesshaar strong. Subwarden, Thesk's voice came back unhurried. Tell me the yield of the blast if you sever that field now. Eric Vall had the number ready. He was a good officer. Contained within 11,000 kilometers, Warden Ascendant. The arm stands off at 19,000. We are safe by a wide margin. The strike is clean. That is the yield if you sever it now, Thesk said. Tell me the yield if your lance misses the control station by a single ship length. Tell me the yield if the organism, feeling the strike come, does with the star at the last instant what you have already watched it do at will, lifts it, in the half-second your lance takes to cross the gap. Tell me the yield then, Subwarden, and tell me your certainty on the figure. Eric Vall opened his mouth to give the number, and found he did not have it. He did not have it because there was no way to compute it. The organism could lift the star. They had all watched it lift the star, and a target that could change its own yield in the instant of your strike was a target whose blast radius you could not calculate, and a blast whose radius you could not calculate was a blast you could not stand off from because you did not know how far off standing off was. The doctrine assumed a static enemy. The doctrine assumed that a thing once measured stayed measured, and the thing in that chair did not stay measured. It reached. Every time they looked at it, it had reached further, and the whole certainty of the kinetic lance solution rested on the fire being small when the lance arrived. And there was no power in the Concord that could promise Eric Vall the fire would be small when the lance arrived, because the fire was in the hands of something that could make it large. The subwarden Stalks drew back. I withdraw the request, Warden Ascendant. I cannot certify the yield. No, Thesk said, and there was no cruelty in it, only the terrible gentleness of an elder watching a younger one lose the thing that had made him feel safe. You cannot. Neither can I. That is what we are looking at, Subwarden. Not a strong enemy. We have beaten strong enemies. An uncomputable one. Hold your fire. Hold your fire and learn the thing I am learning, because you will need it for the rest of your life. There are variables the engine cannot hold, and when you meet one, the brave thing and the wise thing are the same thing, and it is to stop. The channel closed, and Eric Vall stood on the bridge of the just measure and looked at the second sun burning where his doctrine had promised him a helpless target. And for the first time in his young, unblooded service, he was afraid, not of the fire, but of how much of what he had believed had just been shown to rest on nothing. Far in system, off the blue world itself, the two larger arms of the diamond held station above 11 billion humans and reported what they saw. And what they saw disturbed the Vesshaar almost as much as the burning foundry did. The humans were not panicking. By every model the Concord had ever built, a primitive world that woke to find warships in its sky did one of two things. It threw itself into the doomed frenzy of a species that did not understand it had already lost, launching its useless sublight interceptors, firing its silo-bound fusion ordnance at targets 1,000 times beyond its reach, screaming defiance into a dark that would not answer. Or it collapsed into the paralysis of a species that understood too well, governments dissolving, populations fleeing, the whole ordered machine of a civilization seizing up in the face of a certainty it could not meet. The models allowed for both. The models had been right on 9 worlds. The humans did neither. They had gone quiet. The reading officers on the in-system arms watched the blue world and reported a strange, disciplined stillness spreading across it, not paralysis, not frenzy, but attention. The chatter of 11 billion lives did not stop. It turned. It turned all of it toward the cold edge of the system, toward the outer foundry, toward the single rising point of light that every human instrument capable of seeing that far had now locked onto. The world was not fighting the fleet in its sky. The world was watching the StarForge. It was as if 11 billion people had, without any order given, understood at once that the fight was not up here in orbit where the warships hung, but out there in the dark where one of their own was doing something at the edge of what a human could do, and that the only thing to do was to be still, and watch, and see whether he could hold it. They are not afraid of us, the reading officer of the second arm reported to the flag and could not keep the unease out of the words. They are afraid for him, the whole population. Their fear is not pointed at our fleet, it is pointed at the foundry. They are watching one of their own attempt the impossible, and they are holding their breath, and they have not spared us so much as a defiant transmission. Warden Ascendant, we came to break their will, and they are behaving as though we are not the thing that matters in their sky. And that, more than the burning core, was what told Thesk the war was already lost. A species that met an invasion by watching one of its own reach past the possible was not a species whose will you could break by presence in its sky, because its will was not in the sky. Its will was in the reaching, and there was no fleet in the Concord that could stand off from that. In the control spire, Kael Ardan reached, and as he reached, he remembered his father. He had not meant to. There was no room in the dance for memory. There was barely room in it for him. But the high state had taken him to a place past exhaustion where the walls between the parts of himself had begun to thin, and in that place the memory came up on its own, unbidden, the way the field fluctuations came up, and he could no more stop it than he could stop them. The number 4 cradle. He had been 11. His father, Kael Ardan, a rigger on the outer ring, had come off a double-shift gray with fatigue and had stopped on his way to sleep at the mouth of the number 4 construction cradle where a half-built hauler hung in its clamps, and had put his hand flat on the cradle's main spar and had gone still. Kael had been with him. Kael had watched him go still. And his father had said, in the voice Kael would spend the rest of his life trying to describe to people who did not believe him, it's going to let go. This spar. It's going to let go. I can feel it. And the cradle master had come and had run the gauges, and the gauges had said the spar was sound, and the cradle master had told Kael Ardan to go to bed, that he was tired, that he was hearing things. And Kael Ardan had not been able to show a working, because he did not have one, because the knowing was under the working where no exam could reach it, and so he had gone to bed. And 6 hours later the number 4 spar had let go, exactly as he had said, and taken 3 riggers with it into the dark. And Kael Ardan had never once forgiven himself for not standing in front of that cradle and refusing to move, gauges or no gauges. And he had never sighed at his strange, quiet son again, because he had understood, too late and at too high a price, that the boy heard the same thing he did, only clearer. And that the world would spend its whole life telling the boy he was wrong right up, until the moment he was catastrophically right. Show them, his father had told him once near the end, in the low, broken voice the accident had left him. Not with a working. You'll never have a working. We don't get workings, you and me. Show them by being right when it costs everything to be right. That's the only proof they'll take. And Kael, 11 and then 14 and then 20, had carried that and had never known what to do with it, had failed exam after exam that demanded the working he did not have, had been called tap and strange and unfit, and had never once found the thing that would let the knowing under his working speak loud enough for anyone to hear. Until now. Until a captured star and an empty chair and 60 warships and no reason left not to reach. I found it, he told his father in the wordless place holding the fire. I found the thing that lets it speak. You were right. We don't get workings, but we get this. And he lifted the star another fraction up the curve, smooth as breathing, and somewhere on the blue world, 11 billion people watched the point of light at the edge of their system climb, and held their breath, and did not know his name and would learn it. Warden Ascendant Oru Thesk did not give the order to fire. Doctrine screamed for it. Every principle of Vesshaar war held that an enemy capability you did not understand was an enemy capability you destroyed at once, before it could be studied, replicated, turned against you. The Foundry's heart was a weapon now, perhaps the deadliest weapon Thesk had ever faced, a leashed star that could, if that single human chose to loose it, flash across half the system. Doctrine said, strike now, disable the control station, sever the human from the field, let the leash fail while the fire was still small enough for the blast to fall short of the fleet. Doctrine said, kill the young human in the chair before it finished becoming whatever it was becoming. Thesk did not give the order, and he made himself understand why. Because a warden who acted on instinct without knowing his own reasons was a warden already defeated. He did not give the order because the numbers had changed, and he was, before anything else, a creature of the numbers. The tally engine had committed his fleet on a certainty of 99.97, and that certainty had rested on a single load-bearing assumption, that he knew what the humans were. He did not know what the humans were. He had thought a foundry was a foundry, and a primitive was a primitive, and one young member of the species had just, alone and unaugmented, done a thing his entire civilization filed under impossible. Every number he had was now suspect. And a warden ascendant did not commit an irrevocable act, did not fire on a leashed star and gamble the whole arm on where the blast would fall, on the strength of numbers he no longer trusted. But there was a second reason, and Thesk was old enough and honest enough to name it to himself even as the first reason gave him cover. He did not fire because he wanted to understand. In 1100 years his species had conquered by knowing. It had never, not once, encountered a thing it could not weigh. And here at the cold edge of a primitive system was a thing it could not weigh, sitting in a chair, holding a sun, and every instinct beneath Thesk's numbers. The deep old instinct that had made him leave the diamond and lead this arm himself, turned toward it with something he had no word for, and that a warmer species might have called wonder. "Open a channel to the control station," he said. "Voice, their protocol, I wish to speak to it." "Warden Ascendant," the tactical officer said low. "Doctrine." "I know the doctrine," Thesk said. "I have followed it across 9 worlds. On the 10th I find a variable the tally engine cannot see, and I will not throw my arm into a stellar blast on the word of an engine that has already been proven blind today. We hold, we watch, and we speak. Open the channel." In the control spire, a voice came into the roar. Kael almost did not hear it. It reached him through the station's comms, threaded under the enormous sound of the forge, and for a moment it was just one more thing at the far edge of his star-filled awareness. But it was speech, human words, badly shaped by something that had learned the language from intercepted signals and did not have a mouth built for it, and the strangeness of it snagged the small human part of him that still lived beneath the dance. "Human," the voice was flat, toneless, assembled. "You who hold the fire, this is Warden Ascendant Oru Thesk of the Vesshaar Concord. I command the fleet arrayed around your installation. I do not ask you to surrender. I ask you a question. Answer, and we will not fire while you speak." Kael could not answer with words. He had no breath for it. Every part of him was given to the dance, and to divide himself even a little was to risk a fluctuation getting past him. But there was a way. His hands were on the yokes, and the yokes controlled the field, and the field was the fire, and the fire was, at this brightness, the most visible thing in the outer system. He could speak with it, not in language, but in the one grammar the Vesshaar had already shown they understood: control. He took the star, for half a heartbeat, and made it pulse. One long, deliberate, perfectly controlled swell of the blue-white heart, up and back down, smooth as breathing, a thing no runaway core could ever do, and then he returned it to its held balance, seamless, without a tremor. "I hear you," the pulse said. "I am not out of control. I am doing this on purpose. Ask." On the bridge of the unbroken ledger, the reading officer whispered. It answered. The core pulsed. A controlled modulation, returned to baseline within tolerance. "Warden Ascendant, it is communicating with the star. It used the star to say yes." Thesk closed his eyes for a moment, and then he asked the question he had come across a dark gulf to ask, the question his whole species needed answered and had never once needed to ask before. "Are you the only one?" he said. "Are you unique among your kind, a singular thing, a freak, a 1 in 11 billion the rest cannot match? Or is what you are doing a thing that many of you could do? Tell me true, human. Tell me whether I face one wonder or a species of them. Answer with your fire and I will believe it, because I have seen that you cannot lie with a star." And in the control spire, Kael Ardan heard the question, and understood exactly what it meant, and understood exactly what the honest answer was, and the honest answer frightened even him. Because the honest answer was, he did not know. He had always thought he was the only one. 20 years of being the strange, quiet tap who heard what the gauges could not. 20 years of failing every exam because he could not show a working he did not have. 20 years of being alone inside a gift no one else seemed to share. He had always believed himself a freak, a one-off, a boy built wrong in a way that happened to be right. If the warden had asked him that morning, he would have answered with the flat certainty of long loneliness, "I am the only one." but he was not sure that was true. He had never been tested against the real edge of human ability, because the exams tested the wrong thing. Ilse Varen had heard it too, a little. You hear it, don't you? Had read the forge off the gauges, but had known there was a hearing beyond the gauges, had known it well enough to name it in him. His father had felt the number 4 cradle going before it went, and had not been believed either. How many humans had a hearing like his and never found the one machine that would let it speak? How many were, right now, on the blue world behind the fleet, tuned to some impossible thing and never once given a star to prove it on? He did not know. No one knew. Humans had never been pushed to the true edge of themselves because nothing had ever pushed them there, until 60 warships came out of the dark and put one young man in a chair with a sun in his hands, and no reason left not to lift it. So Kael answered honestly, in the only grammar he had, and the honest answer was the most terrifying thing he could have said. He did not make the star pulse once for yes. He did not hold it flat for no. He made it pulse and pulse and pulse, a long, patient, rolling series of swells, one after another, each one perfectly controlled, each one identical, a line of suns marching out of the blue-white heart and back, more than the warden had asked for, more than any single answer needed. A count that did not stop, a count that said as clearly as anything ever said with fire, I do not know how many of us there are. I have never been the last one asked. I only know that I did not think I was anything special, and I am doing this. So how many more of us do you imagine are out there who simply never sat the chair? The pulses rolled out of the human foundry, one after another, and on 60 Vesshaar warships, 60 crews watched a young member of a species they had come to break say, in the plainest language in the universe, we do not know our own limit, and neither do you. Warden Ascendant Oruthesk watched the count that did not stop, and something happened to him that had not happened in 1100 years of his species' history, something the tally engines had no column for, and the doctrines no answer to. He felt small. Not outmatched. He had faced things that outmatched a single ship. He had strategy for that. Not surprised. Surprise was a variable he could recompute around. What he felt, watching the endless patient pulses of a handheld star, was the specific vertigo of a mind that has just learned that the thing it built its whole power on knowing was an illusion the universe had permitted it to keep for 1100 years and had now, without warning, taken back. He had thought he knew what strength was. Strength was numbers. Strength was certainty. Strength was 99.97, and projected losses 0. And here was a species that did not know its own strength, had never measured it, had never been made to reach for it, and one unremarkable member of it had reached once under duress and touched a star. And the warden understood, with the cold total clarity that was his species' single virtue, that a foe who does not know his own limit is a foe you cannot compute, and a foe you cannot compute is a foe you cannot beat. Because every certainty you bring to him is a certainty about a thing you have already been shown you do not understand. Warden Ascendant, the tactical officer said, and the flatness was entirely gone from her voice now. What was under it was the thing the Vesshaar had pruned from their speech 1100 years ago and had just rediscovered at the edge of a primitive system. Orders. The core is still climbing. If it continues, its output will exceed the yield that any strike of ours could contain. Soon we will pass the point at which we could safely fire on it at all. If we are to act, we must act now. Do we strike or do we not? Thesk looked at the lens, at the second sun burning where his charts had promised him a helpless foundry, at the endless pulses of an answer he had asked for and would spend the rest of his long life wishing he had never heard. At one young human in one small chair, alone, unafraid, holding in balance the exact thing 1100 years of Vesshaar certainty had declared could not be held. He thought of the diamond, split, 2 arms already closing on a blue world of 11 billion who did not know their own limit, any 1,000 of whom might be tuned to some impossible thing and only waiting, as this one had waited, for something to come out of the dark and give them a reason to reach. And Warden Ascendant Oru Thesk, who had never lost a ship, made the first genuinely uncertain decision of his life. He stood there at the center of his silent bridge, for what his officers would later swear was the longest single interval of stillness any of them had ever seen a Warden Ascendant permit himself. And in that stillness, Oru Thesk weighed the only thing left to weigh. Not the foundry, not the star. Those were beyond weighing now, and he had made his peace with that. What he weighed was the future, and the future came to him in two shapes. In the first shape, he obeyed the doctrine and the fear that wore the doctrine's face, and he threw the arm's fire at the burning heart of the human seed. And one of two things happened. Either the strike killed the young human cleanly, and the star fell loose small and the blast died short, and the conquered recorded a victory it could not repeat, having taught 11 billion humans that the Vesshaar answered wonder with murder. Or the strike came a half-second too slow, and the human lifted the fire, and 60 warships and their Warden Ascendant ended as a spreading ring of light at the cold edge of a system his charts had called negligible. In the second shape, he did the thing no Vesshaar had done, and turned his fleet around, and carried home the one lesson worth 1,100 years of unbroken conquest. That certainty was a gift the universe had lent his kind and had now called back, and that the wise met the uncomputable not with fire but with distance. Both shapes were failures. He knew that. There was no shape in which he returned a victor, because the tally engine's certainty was already dead and nothing he did could revive it. But only one of the two shapes let his crews live, and let the humans keep the peace they had bought, and let the record survive to warn the conquered away from the one door in the galaxy it must never open again. "We do not strike," Warden Ascendant Oru Thesk said. The bridge of the unbroken ledger received the order in silence. It was the first time in the memory of every officer aboard that a Warden Ascendant had looked upon an intact enemy target of unknown capability and chosen not to destroy it. It was, by every letter of Vesshaar doctrine, a failure. And every officer on the bridge, watching the second sun burn at the heart of the human foundry, understood without being told that it was the only sane order in the arm. "Signal the homeworld arms," Thesk went on. "Both of them. They are to break off any pressure on the human world. They are to withdraw to stand off distance and hold. They are to demand nothing, threaten nothing, fire nothing. And they are to transmit to me, in full, everything their sensors have gathered on the human population since arrival." He paused. "I want to know if the tally engine ever flagged this. I want to know if the capability I am looking at was in the data all along, in some signal we filed as noise, and we simply lacked the column to read it." But even as he said it, Thesk knew what the answer would be, because he had already understood the shape of his species' blindness. The tally engine had not missed a signal. There was no signal to miss. The humans themselves had not known. You could not put a column in your engine for a strength a species had never measured in itself. The Vesshaar had come to weigh a world, and the world had turned out to weigh more than it knew, and no amount of sensor data gathered before this hour could have shown it, because it had not existed before this hour. It had been latent, folded up inside 11 billion ordinary people, waiting for a reason. The Vesshaar had brought the reason. That was the joke of it, the thing Thesk would carry to the end of his days. They had come to break the humans, and in coming, they had shown the humans the edge of themselves, and there was no unshowing it now. "Warden Ascendant," the reading officer again. "The core, it has stopped climbing. It is holding at its current output, stable, balanced, at a yield far beyond anything we could safely engage. The human is no longer lifting it. It is simply holding it, waiting." Thesk looked at the lens. "Then it has said everything it means to say," he said quietly. "It has told us it is real. It has told us it does not know its own number, and now it holds the fire it lit and it waits to see whether we have understood." He drew himself up, the old gray warden at the center of his silent bridge. "Open the channel again. I would answer it." In the control spire, Kael was dying by degrees, and he knew it, and it did not frighten him the way he would once have thought it should. He had held the high state for longer than any body was built to. He did not know how long. There was no time in the dance, only the endless falling forward. But the small human part of him beneath the fire had begun to send up reports, faint and far away, and the reports were not good. His hands had gone past pain into a distant numbness. Something behind his eyes was pounding in time with the roar. His hearts. He had won, humans had won, but it felt now like the fire had two of its own and both were his, labored. He could hold the star, but he was not sure he could hold it and also live not for much longer, and the two tasks had begun, very slowly, to come apart. He had stopped climbing because he had reached the place he needed. The field was harder now than any weapon in that fleet could break. The lifeboats were long clear, every one of them. He had felt the last of them go. The thing he had sat down to do was done. He was holding now, not to buy minutes, but because a held star could not simply be dropped. To let go was not to stop. To let go was to loose it. If he took his hands from the yokes, the fire he had lifted into the high state would come off the leash all at once, and it would flash across the outer system in a single wasted instant, and it would take him and the StarForge, and if they were still close, some of the 60 ships with it. He could end them. Part of him, the exhausted, furious part, whispered that he could end them, that he had only to open his hands and the aggressors who had come to break his home would burn with it. He did not open his hands, not because he could not, but because that was not the answer to the question they had asked. They had asked what humans were. If he loosed the star and burned them, the answer would be, humans are a bomb, and humans were not a bomb. He had not lit this fire to destroy. He had lit it to hold the line, to hold the boat's horizon, to hold 4,000 lives in the dark against a certainty that had come to erase them. The whole meaning of what he had done was in the holding. To end it by letting go would be to unmake the answer at the last moment, to tell them the wrong thing about his kind with the last thing he ever did. He would not. So when the warden's voice came into the roar a second time, Kael listened and held and waited to hear whether it had understood. Human, the assembled voice was different now. Something had gone out of it and something else had come in, and though Kael had no name for the tones of a Vesshaar, he heard the change the way he heard everything under the words. You have answered me, and I believe you because a being cannot lie with a star. I asked whether you were one wonder or a species of them, and you told me you do not know, and that is the truest and most terrible answer you could have given, and I will carry it to the end of my days. A pause, the roar filled it. I came to break your seed before it could flower, the warden said. That was my purpose and my certainty. I see now that I came too late by a measure I cannot compute, because your seed has already flowered, in you, in one young member of a species that did not know it could do this until my arrival gave it cause. I cannot break what I do not understand. I will not spend my fleet learning the depth of a strength you have not yet finished discovering in yourselves. There is no victory here that my engines can promise me, and I do not commit my ships to a war whose end I cannot see. So I will tell you what I am going to do, human, and then you may let your fire rest, for we will not be here to make you hold it. And Kael, holding the star, holding his failing body, holding the answer he had lit with everything he had, listened to a warden ascendant of the Vesshaar Concord do the thing his species had not done in 1100 years. I am going to withdraw, Thesk said. All 3 arms, from your foundry, from your moon, from your world. I am going to carry home the record of what I saw at the cold edge of this system. One young human, alone, holding a star in balance by hand, and telling me it did not know how many more like it there were. I am going to lay that record before the conquered, and I am going to tell them the truth that the tally engines cannot, that here is a species we cannot weigh, and that a species we cannot weigh is a species we do not fight, because we win only what we can compute, and we can compute nothing about you. You will not see us again. And if in the long years your kind reaches the rest of the dark and finds the marks of the Vesshaar upon it, Know that it was one of you, in one chair, on one bad day, who bought that peace. Not by burning us, though I believe now that you could have, but by holding your fire when you had every cause to loose it. That is the last thing your star told me, human, that you knew you could end us and chose to hold instead. Rest now. We are leaving. The channel closed, and Kael felt them go. He felt it the way he had felt them arrive, before any gauge could show it, 60 enormous presences in the dark, and then the great gathering pressure of their engines, and then, one by one and then all together, the pressure turning away, receding, 60 warships of a species that had never retreated peeling back from the StarForge and the moon and the blue world and folding away into the deeper dark, and the two arms far in system turning with them. And the whole certainty that had come out of the black, to erase 11 billion people withdrawing, quietly, completely, forever. They were gone. Kael let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 1100 years. And now, at last, he could let the star rest, not drop it, never drop it, but bring it down, the way he had brought it up, one correction at a time, walking the fire back down the curve from the high state through the running state toward the cold and safe, smooth as breathing, no lunge, no tremor, a boy setting down a sun as gently as a sleeping child. It took a long time. It took everything he had left and then a little more that he did not know he had. The roar behind the glass eased from its nameless pressure back down to a scream, and from a scream back down to a chord, the old familiar chord of the StarForge, the first sound he had ever known. And when the fire was safe, truly safe, low and leashed and no danger to anyone, Kael Ardan took his numb, ruined hands off the yokes and sat back in the Forge Master's chair, and looked out through the armored glass at the dark where the enemy had been and was no longer, and let himself, finally, shake. They found him 4 hours later. Ilse Varen came back first, in the lead lifeboat of the returning fleet, having refused to fold for the inner system until she had seen with her own eyes whether the StarForge still hung in the dark, or whether there was only a spreading ring of light where it had been. She found it whole. She found the core safe and low. And she found, in the Forge Master's chair that no apprentice was ever permitted to touch, a 20-year-old boy who had been unable to stand when the danger passed and had simply stayed where he was, exhausted past speech, looking out at the empty dark, and who turned his head when she came up through the hatch and gave her a small, wrecked, human smile. They understood, he said, his voice was a ruin. In the end, they asked me what we were and I told them the truth and they understood. He looked back out at the dark. I didn't know either, Forge Master, when they asked. I still don't. How many of us could do this, if something ever made us reach? Ilse Varen crossed the spire and put her hand on the shoulder of the boy. She had let sit the second chair through the small hours because she had known, without ever being able to prove it, that he heard the fire in a way the gauges never would. She looked out with him at the dark where 60 warships had come without fear and left without a shot, driven off not by a fleet the humans did not have, but by one young man in a chair who had shown them, in the only language that could not lie, the edge of a strength his whole species had never thought to measure. I don't know either, she said, but I think that's what frightened them, not that you could do it. That they couldn't count how many more of you there might be. She squeezed his shoulder. Come on, Ardan, let's get you out of that chair. You've earned better than a seat you were never certified for. Kael laughed once and it hurt, and it was the best thing he had felt in 20 years. Far away, folding through the dark toward a home that would never again begin a war with the word certainty, Warden Ascendant Oru Thesk stood on the bridge of the unbroken ledger and looked at nothing, and carried within him the single reading that every sensor across 60 hulls had detected in the same amber instant, the reading that had ended 1100 years of unbroken conquest without a single shot fired. Not a fleet, not an engine, not a weapon. One young human, sitting in a chair holding a star and refusing when he could have burned them all to let it go. They had attacked Earth without fear. They would never make that mistake again.